Good evening and a very warm welcome to this edition of the Big Debate on CTV. I'm your host, Igoma Gabriel. We're coming to you live on this 12th day of July 2022. We're coming to you from our premises on Ntinda 2 Road in Naguru. Glad that you're joining us for this edition of the show. And a special welcome to those that are following us online. And if you would like to comment and give your opinion during the show today, remember to use the hashtag CTV Big Debate. Today we'll look at the growing debt, Uganda's national debt, which has been increasing at worrying levels, with some reports putting it at almost 80 trillion shillings, going beyond the 50% to GDP mark that East African countries had committed to stay below. And yet the government insists that the debt is sustainable. In fact, that there's no country in the world that does not have any debt. And therefore, if we would like to have the kind of development that we need as a country to sustain our growth, the government has got to borrow money in order to finance some of these projects. Recently, Ugandans were stunned when a certain newspaper quoted that each Ugandan, all 40+ million of us, or about 1.5 million shillings in debt, and that Uganda would take about 50 years to pay off this debt. Who is making sure that our debt is sustainable? What does this mean for the future generations? Because eventually this debt has got to be paid. How do we develop when we don't have the resources at hand? Today we dig deep into those issues. Before we go any further, let's meet our panelists for today's debate.
Our panel tonight. Dickson Skateshungwa is a Ugandan politician who serves as member of the 11th Parliament representing Shema Municipality. Skateshungwa, who sits on the Budget Committee of Parliament, is a trade, investment and tax policy advisory, leadership and governance expert, and also a former chairperson of the World Customs Organization's Council. Katesh, as he is known by his peers, has previously served in the Customs Investigations Department at the Uganda Revenue Authority. He has also served as chairman of the Board of Trustees of URA Staff Retirement Benefits Scheme. Kateshumba holds a bachelor's degree in commerce from Delhi University and a master's degree in business administration, finance from Sikkim Manipal University of Health. Muhammad Mwanga Chivumbi is a Ugandan politician, economist and member of parliament representing Butambala constituency. Chivumbi, who also sits on the Finance Committee of Parliament, is also the Shadow Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. Chivumbi, who has been in Parliament since 2011, is known for his activism and political stand, especially when it comes to bad policy matters. Chivumbi holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Economics from Makerere University, an Associate degree in Democracy and Development at Uganda Matters University in Kozi, and a Master for Human Resource Management at Uganda Management Institute. Gilbert Musinguzi is a civil society-based good governance and human rights activist, currently working with Uganda Debt Network. Musinguzi has previously served in capacities in different organizations such as World Vision International, Uganda Action Network on Small Arms, Anti-Corruption Coalition. Musinguzi currently serves as the person in charge of quality assurance of programs in Uganda Debt Network, promoting good governance through anti-corruption advocacy, coalition, building on effective utilization of natural resources, as well as citizen-centered public debt management. Musinguzi holds a bachelor's degree in English literature and political science from Makerere University, a postgraduate diploma in education, and a master's in public administration and management from Makerere University. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel tonight.
There you are, our panel for tonight, but with a slight variation. The Honorable Mwanga Chivumbi just called us about an hour ago. He had a medical emergency, but he went ahead and contacted one of his colleagues who we are very glad was able to adjust his program and be here with us, the Honorable Karim Masaba, He is MP for Mbale Municipality. We're glad to have you here. He has a bachelor's of economics from Makerere University, and if time had allowed, we would also do a bio of him, but you can find that online. I was just looking at his LinkedIn, and rich bio there. You should go and check it out. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the big debate.
Good evening to you.
It's good to have you all here, and I hope you had a good day. Yes, I was watching our news, and you know, Honorable Masaba, I did see you in the news seated in the finance committee today, you know, running national issues, and the story in particular was one that many have interest in, and you know, I'd like to just get you and the Honorable Katesh especially quick comments on that issue of you know, Uganda, the government deciding to invest in ROCO. But for those who missed it, let's just ask the technical team to just play, you know, about a minute of what transpired.
In investing in local, we are buying 150,000 preference shares in local construction company. To help the company, first of all, resolve its liquidity challenges, and number two, we want to have a stake in the governance and management of local. We think as government we should have a stake in the construction industry, and the only way we can do it is investing in some of the companies like local, which already has a name, which is already leading. Until when it got problems, local was the leading construction company in Uganda. We are buying 150,000 preference shares in local construction company. To help the company, first of all, resolve its liquidity challenges, and number two, we want to have a stake in the governance and management of local. We think as government we should have a stake in the construction industry, and the only way we can do it is investing in some.
All right, just a brief there. The Honorable Musasizi is speaking to the media after that meeting with the Finance Committee of Parliament. Gentlemen, that's not our focus for today, but it was our top story, and I know many people, you know, having MPs seated here with us, a member from the civil society, would just like your quick comments. And I will start with you because the committee didn't seem quite happy with the minister, actually asking him to go back and return with, you know, more details for you. But very briefly, is this a good deal for the country?
Thank you very much, my brother, and to all our viewers out there, good evening to you. Masaba Karim, probably it's my first time. I think it's my first time on CTV. I'm new to some of the members out there watching. Masaba Karim, the Member of Parliament representing Industrial Division in Valley City. And I'm also the Shadow Minister of Tourism and Wildlife. I saw brief background about my colleagues. Perhaps I could just give a highlight. I'm an economist by profession. I have a bachelor's degree in quantitative economics from Makerere University, and I went further and studied a Master's of Arts in Economic Policy and Planning from York University in Canada, and I spent some time working as an economist in Amazon Logistics before I came back to contest in 2020. In a nutshell, this could be one of the worst deals we are entering in as a country, according to what we've been presented with so far. We've taken time and looked at all documents. ROCO presented a very detailed file which had almost everything we had wanted initially, which included the audited accounts, the memorandum of understanding, the articles of association, everything we had requested them for. But when you take a critical look at all this, the deal is not proper for the country. That's why we are still rejecting it up to now. We are requesting for the minister to come back with better ideas, with better amendments, which we believe will favor this country. Because the minister has come and is presenting to the committee that government wants, or it's going to buy shares of about 150,000 shares in ROCO, worth 207 billion, not the initial 202 billion. But these shares don't exist. They are nowhere to be seen. And when we look at the Articles of Association and Memorandum of Rocco Construction Company, the company only has 200 shares, which are the ordinary shares which belong to the original shareholders, which they have actually inherited up to now. So there is nothing like preference shares that exists anywhere in the company documents. And the minister claims that there is a resolution by the board to create these new shares for government to buy, which resolution were not given, which resolution they claim up to now has not been registered because they're trying to find a way of government waiving off the stamp duty of about 800 million shillings. So we believe that was supposed to be the first step. Before you come to government to bail you out or to buy shares, what are you selling? What is government going to buy? So right now, government is buying air. We don't have anything that government is buying.
Right.
That is.
And what is government going to use to buy these shares if it actually did sail through? Because this is 207 billion shillings that I believe wasn't initially planned for in the budget.
This money does not exist, and according to the plan, they plan on borrowing this money to still add on the stock.
To add to
the debt stock that we're already suffering with. So it wouldn't be bad to bail out Rocco. But when you look at the circumstances and the documentation, the way things stand, right now we cannot go into it. And we are wondering, why does Rocco want to be bailed out? They have told us that it's in a financial crisis. But when you look at the books of accounts, the financial statement, the income statement, they all show that Rocco has been making money. In the past 10 years, Rocco has only made a loss in the year of 2020. And it made a loss of 2 billion. But initially it was making 3 billion, 5 billion. So the 2 billion loss it made in 2020 cannot be reason enough. It can't be enough for government to begin saying Rocco is in a financial crisis. So we are wondering what has caused Rocco all these financial difficulties, as the minister claims. So we are still investigating. All right. And I don't want to preempt what the committee is still finding, but so far, we've discovered a lot, and at least we need the resolution by the board that these shares exist, these shares are being given out at such and such a price, so that we can proceed from there. But without that, then we have hit a dead end as government. And when you look at the shares that government is buying, according to the agreement, government is buying the preference shares, which are coming at a cost because this is borrowed money. Government is going to spend $54 million. That is what it's going to pay after the 4 years. But it's supposed to be spending 42. So there is that premium, that interest that is coming, about 380,000 extra per share that the government is incurring, which is a lot of money, which is 57 billion as a cost of financing this entire process. And they are promising us a profit of 4.3% returns. And when you compute, this is less than what we are going to actually be getting. So we are carrying an expense of 6%.
Will own, if this happens, government will own it probably till, Rocco closes.
No,
so eventually the money can be recouped, can't it?
That is why I differentiated between the ordinary shares and the preference shares.
Yes.
So the ordinary shareholders are the shareholders from the day the company started until the day the company will close. The preference shareholder, you're just there as an investor. Anytime these ordinary shareholders can decide, we don't want you anymore. We are chasing you out, we are pushing you out.
Pay you out, right?
Yeah. So government right now is entering a very, very poor deal, the way it's structured right now. And I think if we were getting some of the ordinary shares, then it would be safe for us as a country. Because we would have a say in the day-to-day running of the company, we would have a say in the decision-making of whatever is happening. But right now, government of Uganda is only invited, it's only called to go and attend the annual general meeting. And it has 2 people who are going to be added on the board. They are creating space for 2 more people. But already Rocco has 5 people. So the 5 can always come to consensus and decide whatever they want. And you're not given opportunity or priority as a government to get to decide. The ordinary shares are about 15,000. And each valued at $1 million, that is 15 billion. Us who are investing 207 billion, we don't have anything to to say or to do in the day-to-day running of this company, which we believe is not proper. Let government buy some of the ordinary shares. Then we'll be guaranteed that our investment is safe.
All
we
right.
can have a say in what is happening.
Are those
in the company.
ordinary shares up for sale? Well, let's go to
No, they're
ordinary
not up for sale, but we could push them because they need government to help.
Yeah.
Then government can push them, and they're getting a return of about 7%. Yes, yet us as a country who are investing 207 billion, we are getting a return of 4.3%, which is quite unfair.
All right. Honorable Katesh, your quick comments on this proposed deal.
Well, my colleague, first of all, good evening, viewers, and thank you for inviting me here. It's my first time. My colleague who sits on the Finance Committee, I think, has examined information that have not come to my attention yet. And he has ably explained, at least. My view is that there is a problem in the way government approaches certain issues. I don't know whether it is an issue of competence. I don't know whether it is an issue of, deciding without thinking, because the questions that the colleagues are asking, I think, are bordering on how is this matter presented? What actually does government want? Because you are asking ordinary shares, why don't we buy ordinary shares? But he has told you the value. How much?
There are 15,000 shares, each valued at 1 million, which is 15 billion.
Exactly. So they need 200 billion. So even if you bought all of them. So for me, I think the decision making in government is something that we need to examine, because if world over, globally, governments bail out companies, okay? And of course, Ugandans will have questions around the choice. Why this one? Why not this one?
Not the other?
Okay?
How does government reach the decision of which company to
Yeah,
bail
you
out
have companies
and which one?
like Abubakar Technical Services, law companies which are struggling. We have had, the likes of Sembu. There's so many. So there is the question around why. Why this one? Why not the other one? Okay. There's also a question of when I listen to the reasons being justified about you have government and institutions like national housing, which are supposed to be the government arm, investment arm in the sector, and funded, okay? And then you are saying that you need to have a stake in the construction sector, but you already have an entity that actually has zero budget for development. Then there is also a question about liberalization. What does it mean when government gets into the business and therefore must compete with the private sector for especially government contracts? So there are questions around that. And most importantly for me is the process. What do you actually want? Has actually government prepared a case? Have they studied the governance of this company? Have they studied the situation? And do they think that buying preferential shares is the right thing to do? I feel that there has not been a proper technical and political understanding of the problem to find a solution. And therefore, when things come to Parliament and they are not properly refined, you will get a lot of questions from members of Parliament who are learned, you have accountants, you have auditors, you have economists. They will ask questions like he's asking. And then government ends up looking very shabby. You are trying to explain. So my view is that the committee is going to do its work. They will come up with the recommendations, which are examine them. If the deal is not good for Uganda, as members of Parliament, we cannot be used to support something that is not tenable. But I would like us to wait for the committee to come up with the analysis.
All right. Yeah. You know, as the Honorable Katesh was, you know, giving his views, I remember the president not too long ago, you know, passing a directive that the UPDF, what's it called, engineering brigade, should be the one to, you know, do construction works, government construction works, and you know, an instruction being given to a couple of entities to actually go ahead and you know, give these deals to the UPDF. I wonder what that means now that government will be investing or plans to invest in ROCO that pretty much does the same work. But Mr. Musinguzi, would like you to weigh in on this, and I'm sure you've analyzed it from very many directions.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, viewers, once again. Yeah, I didn't fully watch the story, but just by the clip that you have played, I can make quick comments. The first one is a question about whether it's a going concern. These economists would help. And if it is not, then why come in? Is it a profitable venture for one to really try to engage in? Or we are approaching a dead horse and we also want to join in the fray and join the carcass. In his constituency, there was a friend of mine who told me a story about a child who was given a coke, and they said, you take this coke because there was coccidiosis around. He said, go. Even if they give you 600, just bring. Maybe the coke was costing around 1,000. And they said, you child, are you selling the coke? He said, yes. How much? He said, 600. But it is sick. If it wasn't sick, I would have charged, of course, more. And of course, the buyers, having heard that it is sick, they wouldn't buy. So if indeed this kind of coke we are selling, is it live? Is it likely to continue and survive or not? So challenge it being a going concern, we need to establish that. And how do we do it? Just in the news again, international scene, we of recent have been hearing the case of Twitter, where, what's the name of this?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, initially having decided to buy it, but then on later doing due diligence, he established that these people are not declaring all the information, that some of the accounts they had were fake. Indeed, when somebody is selling their property, usually they paint the best picture they could, when actually the reality may be quite negative. So to what extent is this ROCO construction company declaring information that is really credible and worthwhile to invest in? He is already observing that just by a quick analysis, most of information has been found to be wanting. So how much more is not really valid? You have talked of the local government structures. I don't know the status of that. Government is flip-flopping. Today it decides to go into privatization. Why did it decide to privatize the whole process, the liberalization as it calls it, and then again it's going back? Initially it said government is not good at doing business. Then again all of a sudden it says let's do business. So it needs to be somehow consistent, because this is not proper. A local construction company, at one time it was very good, but okay, credible, always having these contracts, but it's long since I last saw it in action. So the challenge is, it's very likely not to be a viable project for us to go into, and we need to fully establish, but of course we also need to establish who are the people behind this project. At one time we need actually to be very clear, push these MPs to come and clarify whoever is coming up, whichever project is there, they should also declare the owners, so that along the way we should establish one of them. For example, this project is coming at the foothills of the issue that has just been challenged, the issue of coffee. The same person having been involved in Loboa construction, which failed, and now along the way. So how much due diligence has been done? And you never know. Probably we might soon hear, what's the name of, is it Mwenempaka, who brought out the is it Banika, the people who unearthed some of the agreements that were actually showed. So you may find that actually already some agreements could have been signed. If it hasn't happened, please, because usually we hear this information, then all of a sudden somebody comes and says, you know, unless we go forward, government is likely to lose because we have made this commitment, and they put you like on a what? On a hook. So we would like to have those issues considered before we go ahead. But on my quick analysis, we are saying that it's a bad deal. Let's not go into it. We have a lot of things. And of course, from the debt perspective, where I come from, already we are saying we are being choked by debt. And now, this one we are saying we are going to finance it using extra debt. We have already exceeded the threshold. Then two, this is, we haven't even entered the first month of the year, of the financial year. And again, we are proposing to incorporate an extra item. So it shows total lack of planning. Has it just, today is 13th. When did they come out with the issue? Couldn't they have considered it during the financial year that has just been launched? Those are my quick comments.
Gentlemen, thank you. And I know you would want to, you know, say a few more things, especially a way forward. But since this is a developing story, we will continue to cover it for our viewers and be sure that in our news and on our platforms, we will continue to cover this. And if the need arises, we will find these fine gentlemen to come and discuss it further. But now I'd like us to segue into, you know, the issue of debt, which is our main topic today. And yes, the ROCO issue, yes, because of the way it will be financed, definitely also feeds into our topic on debt. I would like to start with Mr. Musinguzi on, you know, where are we at least from an outsider's perspective, and you know, in relation to our debt, and you have already, you know, you had already started on it. If you could just go ahead and, you know, give us the figures and the picture.
Okay. Uganda's debt currently, it has been growing consistently, and the public debt increased just in these last 2 years up to a tune of at least 50.4% to GDP. 50.4% of the GDP of Uganda, it is debt, and then the rest is okay. It is okay. GDP ratio to debt. The debt constitutes the majority, the bigger portion of that. So, and now having increased, we see indeed a trend. Initially, as you have observed in the intro, you mentioned that the threshold is ideally 50%. We have exceeded it. Initially, the finance minister kept on saying, no, we are still below. And finally, when information couldn't be hidden, it came to 50.4%. But that is the official figure. But our analysis shows that it could even be much higher. And with this information, we haven't even factored in some other issues, like, for example, there is money that we have guaranteed to pay. There is, for example, Uganda Development Bank and the IU Mbale University, which have money payable. The government has guaranteed those institutions to a lot of money also, around, I can't remember the figure, but a lot of money of that. Then there are, of course, out of the budget that we have just passed, about more than 30% of that is to go into debt servicing. So you can imagine about 30% of the national budget of, say, 48 trillion, that one going into debt servicing. And then the big part of the budget again is coming. We are projecting that we are going to get money from outsiders. Some of it domestic, and other monies are externally financed. So this budget trend is really worrying, and like you observed, the majority of us are going to be encumbered with this debt. Agreed that every country is supposed to, every country borrows. In some of the languages we say there's no, if you do not borrow, then you might end up embarrassing people from your end. You can go to a party with clothes that are not so fine, and yet you don't have. So we agree almost all countries borrow, And actually some of these developed countries, I saw Japan, US the other time, which are about 250%. But for them, they are creditworthy and they manage to pay. But in a country like Uganda, we have seen likelihood of defaulting, and there are a lot of implications when you default. One, you'll not be credible before the lenders. Two, your assets might be taken. Of course, we remember the cases of some of these things, much as they have been denied, and they are saying some of our projects like International Airport and others are likely to be taken by these Chinese. And another, I hasten also to add that some of these, the majority of the loans, especially which are being contracted, say from China or wherever, the interest rate is higher, not compared to the other traditional concession loans like UD, like those of World Bank and others. So the trend is worrying, and we need to put a stop at this appetite. There are countries that have absolutely no debt. I was checking and I found that there was a country called, is it Hong Kong? Hong Kong has almost 0% of its budget fully facilitated and financed by itself without any borrowing. The borrowing is very little. Could we learn from some of those countries that how have they managed to do it? Two, for the countries that normally borrow and even exceed limits, how capable are they? For us, we have definitely seen that we are incapable of managing the debt. When we analyze even the money that we got out of the debt, we know that we have challenges of absorption of the debt, provision of matching funds for the contracts. Like I saw, the Auditor General was indicating that about 7% of the money that was disbursed, 7% of the money was not utilized, much as it had been disbursed for debt, for implementation of debt projects, but then it wasn't utilized. So the burn rate, we are very poor at that. So we have a lot of issues, and then of course we have been cumulatively not managed to date, in spite of the fact that there are instances when we have ever got, for example, debt relief. And of recent, I think last year, we were also applying for the same. So the creditors will reach a point when they will say, no, you know what? These people, we have forgiven them twice. They are making it a habit. We cannot go far. And besides, they also have their own challenges currently.
All right. Yeah. Well, Honorable Kateshumba, I'd like to come to you on your analysis of our debt situation. And, you know, the famous question, is this debt sustainable?
That question is debatable. As we stand now, I think the stock of debt as at the end of the financial year, as at the end of December, was 73.5 trillion, which is about 49.7% of our GDP. There is no doubt globally that everybody has debt. Almost every country has got debt. In fact, if you look at Japan, 236% debt. Our neighborhood here, Sudan, 200%. Many countries, Italy, over 100%. Countries have borrowed over and above their GDP. Okay? Ourselves, we have borrowed almost half of our GDP. And I think the question would be, what are we borrowing for? Okay? And are we efficient in utilizing the loans, the amounts we have borrowed? The other one would be, what kind of loans are we taking? Are we taking concessional loans that have more flexible terms, or non-concessional loans? If you look at the last 5 years, the share of the concessional loans has dropped by 15.9% in the last 5 years. So clearly, we have moved away from the concessional loans to non-concessional loans, which have more stringent, they are more expensive, but I guess easier to get politically. Now, If you look at the Auditor General's reports, we are not efficient in terms of utilizing debt. We have borrowed money, we pay interest when money is unutilized. I don't think that one you would find it in countries that we want to compare ourselves with that have high debt. They are more efficient. You cannot borrow money and it lies idle and you start paying interest because you are not prepared, because you have a planning problem. So that is, if you work like that, then your debt becomes unsustainable because you are enriching, you are not, the money we borrow is supposed to enhance the development of the country through productivity. So if you are borrowing for a road, then that road becomes an enabler of economic, transformation. It is perhaps facilitating export of goods, movement of goods into the markets. So you have to do it efficiently to make sure that that infrastructure is done. But if you borrow money and a big some percentage is borrowed and you are not ready to spend it, but you are paying, you are meeting the costs, the commitment fees, then you are not being efficient. And I think we have been doing badly on that front. The other issue is that we do not have the fiscal discipline as a country to understand that we may need to cut the coat according to our size. If you look at just the discussion we have just had, we have finished the budgeting process. We are in the first quarter of the budget implementation, but there is supplementary being prepared.
The first 13 days.
And then there is a directive to get money to buy shares, right? So,
who said it's a directive?
Okay, whatever it is. But there is a
maybe it could be.
Yes. So, the question is, where are our priorities? If you are already having so many unfunded priorities, right? You do not have, you have a fiscal deficit. Your tax revenue is not sufficient to cover even your recurrent expenditure. You have crossed half of your GDP.
Right.
And then you are making commitments within the first month. You see, if we do not tame that appetite, then we are going to drive ourselves into serious economic problems. You know, Sri Lanka, the state just collapsed the other day. Sri Lanka's debt rose from 91% to 119% from 2018 to 2021, dramatically, because of poor economic decisions. You know, this craze about infrastructure, they are borrowing, building a new airport, and then suddenly you have exhausted your reserves, and then there is a global crisis that can happen anytime, and you find yourself in a situation where Sri Lanka is. So I'm not saying that we are leading there, but what I'm saying is that, yes, we can borrow, okay? It is not worrying, but what are we borrowing for? Are we borrowing to put into productive ventures that will lead to growth of our GDP? Because if the GDP grows, that ratio keeps going down, okay? But if we don't realize the GDP growth consistently, then you will see this ratio continuing, okay? Secondly, for me, it is incompetent for anyone in government who has a project to prepare it, make a proposal to borrow, get the money, then it lies idle and you start paying interest. That is incompetence. And really, I belong to the ruling party. I think this is something that is not acceptable. if we have to borrow money, let's
And
borrow
yet
when
the
we are
Auditor
ready.
General's report consistently,
Exactly.
year on year,
Let's borrow
is
money.
bringing the same issue up.
Yes, and no action is taken. So let's borrow money when we are ready. You cannot borrow money. I have seen so many projects which are unfunded priorities, but we have already made commitments. So you have the funding, external funding, but you have no provision for counterpart funding. And then the project drags for years. You know, it's unbelievable. For me, that is why the problem is. The number is still acceptable. Kenya has gone to 70% now, I think, projected to be 70. Ghana around 84.6. South Africa projected to 69.9. Countries have borrowed, but what lessons can we benchmark? How efficient are they utilizing loans? Okay, we should not worry about 49% if we are borrowing for development that leads to the expansion of the GDP.
All right. Honorable Katesh, that 49 you are quoting, yes, is probably the last figure government gave, but that was December. And
Yes.
you know the loads you have passed in Parliament from that period. But let me come to the Honorable Masaba and to let's begin with your thoughts on Uganda's debt, whether it is sustainable, and how we procure and what we procure this debt for.
I think I'll begin from the figure my brother talked about of the total stock of debt of the 73.5 trillion which we're having as a country. That was as December 2021. Yes. When you go back 1 year earlier, December 2020, we had a debt stock of about 65.5.
Right.
And the rate of increase of that debt is about 15%. And when we compare with the rate of growth of our GDP, it is alarming.
Yes.
Because
actually, you just reminded me using those, those figures I did see on Statista that come 2026, if we continue borrowing at this rate, come 2026 when we're going for the next election, our debt will be about 118 trillion.
Yes. So when you look at that difference of over 15%, it's very huge, given that the economy is growing at a very slow rate. And every time you notice that the rate of growth of the economy is way less than the rate of increase of your debt stock, then you should know as a country that you're in trouble and you should begin looking for means of trying to solve this issue. And it's the position we are faced with as a country. At this rate, I believe things are getting worse, and they could get out of hand given the innumerous pressures that the government is facing. We are seeing strikes every time, people are demonstrating, we are seeing industrial actions, meaning this is going to increase the consumption of the country. So every time they're increasing the salaries of the teachers, which is very good, know that the debt is going to increase as well. Because when you look at our budget as a country, the 48 trillion that we passed recently, and you look at the money we are collecting as a country, according to the figures, the estimate, we estimate to collect about 25 trillion, that is through the revenue.
Well, that is a target that you are
yes, the target, which
whether that target will be
achieved or not, that is another
that's
story.
Something else. Yes,
it's a story for another day. But
Honorable Katesh may tell us because his extensive work there. You don't think it's achievable? Let's just get that quick comment from Honorable Katesh.
Well, I think we asked the Minister of Finance to give us the assumption, because the target is set based on assumptions of economic growth and many others, but I am not convinced that those assumptions exist, have been studied to stretch our expectations to that level.
All right, yes, Honorable Masaba, you can go right ahead.
Answering that same question, I don't think we'll hit this target. I don't think URA will hit it, because over the past years, it's out of experience, URA has always run short of their targets, and we had some few amendments to the tax laws and all that, which I believe are not enough to significantly increase that difference from over from over the 22, or which was the target, and they collected about 21 to the over 25 that they estimate to collect this time. So I don't think they will hit that target, but I'm only basing on that. And when you look at the recurrent expenditure of the country right now, as it stands, with the poor pay of everyone literally in government, we are spending over 30 trillion on recurrent expenditure. Meaning the money we are collecting as a country, it's not enough to pay our salaries. It's not enough to pay the teachers. It's not enough to pay for all the civil servants out there. Meaning we are actually even borrowing money. Part of the money we are borrowing is going to recurrent expenditure, which expenditure is not ending tomorrow. It will have to keep going on and on and on again. So right now as a country, we need to look at the various ways through which we can cut expenditures, unnecessary spending. Because there are other sectors which I believe government can look at, because once we don't get back and do the math properly, then as a country, we are in a lot of trouble, and perhaps it's only God who will come to our intervention and saving us. Because now when you look at governance and security and human capital development, they're taking the lion's share of the budget. But governance, as a country, we believe there is peace. There is peace right now. There are no wars in the country. So we need to look critically at these things, this classified expenditure. Unfortunately, we don't get that privilege to get to internalize and look at these things. But I think there are some sectors we could target as parliament or as the people in government to cut this recurrent expenditure, to cut some of these sectors, such that we try to keep this debt sustainable. Right now, yes, they will convince us it's sustainable. It's sustainable in the medium term. But what do you expect it to be in the long term? This is something we need to plan for. Let us not look at tomorrow. Let us not look at the next 5 years, but let's look at the next 15, 20 years from now. Where is our debt going to be? Because literally in the layman's language, every Ugandan is owed about 1.5 million.
Oh, yes.
So when will we ever get to pay all this money? And it keeps accumulating year in, year out. So I think we need to go back and do the maths and study well. As my brother put it, right, what are we spending on? What are we borrowing to do? If we are borrowing to construct roads, that is okay because the road will be there for us. But we need to do critical analysis. Right. We need.
And speaking of critical analysis, I was reading some of the analysis from UDN and other, civil society organizations that look at debt and how countries manage their debt. And yes, an analysis was done on money used to, money borrowed for roads. And yes, some of the roads, yes, can lead to this money being paid back because they are linking, certain products to, places where they need to be supplied. But others, roads are done and there's actually barely anything going to come from that direction, which actually makes that road, yes, it is a road, more expensive and not sustainable because it's not going to pay off. But if I'm sure you would like to build on that just before I come back to the MPs.
I add that, one of the areas of concern, one, of course, is about, much as we have made this budget of 48 trillion, and a big portion of it being debt. Yesterday we were in a meeting, the other day, with IGG when we were discussing the African International Day. And we
African Anti-Corruption Day.
African Anti-Corruption Day, yes. IGG was hosting us, and there were representatives from different countries. And one observation was, I think it falls in the ambit of the MPs, that most of these government agencies, when the corruption begins at planning stage. Somebody plans and says, I'm going to insert this figure at planning. Then, of course, it goes through the whole process, budget approval, appropriation, and whatever. So, ultimately, when it's passed and these monies are distributed, then the recipient user agencies, user departments, that's where they now see their cut coming. So, even we would have noticed that probably we shouldn't even have increased this budget from the 45 or so.
Mr. Musinguzi, yes? I like what you're saying there, and we're going to build on that. But, one of the questions is, and the question that keeps coming up is, what are we borrowing for?
What are we borrowing
to justify that,
Yes.
you know, yes, it makes sense to borrow for certain things and not for others.
Yes.
And we've narrowed in here to infrastructure
We have seen
as a driver of development.
Yes.
But is it correct to blanketly say borrowing for infrastructure, roads in particular, is a positive thing?
It is good, but you have correctly observed that most of this infrastructure for which we have borrowed, sometimes we are not optimally utilizing. We talk about the energy, this is Karuma, whichever, some of these, for example, the projects of power that we have finished, you'll find that we are utilizing less than the optimum. So couldn't we have maybe applied just incrementally, not big push, because so that when we launch a project, at least we are getting proceeds very fast, instead of a huge capital being invested there. You are looking at, for example, the markets. You know, there's so many markets that have been built. When you go to Lira, Guru, I see now my place cover is coming up. We see Wandegea. Most of the markets that have been built, people are not using those markets. So to what extent is it when we borrowed the money and built these markets and the markets are not being utilized? What went wrong? Were the people consulted? And we were talking about benchmarking and feasibility studies. Those were not done. I was talking about that budget. I was saying, because what I was building has a linkage to the question about the magnitude of the figure, that at budgeting time, for example, we look at almost 50% of the budget now that is coming being recurrent, and some of the areas which we are planning to fund with this budget, some of them we could also look at them and say, you know what, could we trim? We have seen the budget figures. He was talking about governance and security.
Yeah, and that's under
there is a way now
moving away from the sector budget.
Moving out from the program.
From the sectors to the program.
In a way, this from the sectors to the program, yes. This one kind of it seems to be in response to the civil society call previously, when we were saying these social service sectors are being denied. And ultimately they lumped together some of them, because when you look at governance and security, someone will say, hey, governance, okay, it's to do with anti-corruption, so it's important. They are sneaking in the other, what you have called what? The classified expenditure.
Yes.
Classified. Being a big portion of that, so there are some of the budget areas which probably would have trimmed and not spent so much. We are not at all as is observing. Can we, for example, spend less on those? Right. And then most of these expenditures which are capital, when you compare with the social, like agriculture, health, now they have categorized it as what? As human capital development, constituting about 18%. And yet there are very many sectors. We have education, we have health, we have which other ones? 18%. Compared to the one that is immediately following, the majority of which is security, constituting 14%. So out of this 14%, you may find that governance could be about 3%, and then the 11 being security, and which most of it is classified. And then infrastructure being 8.9%, and of this, half is being borrowed. And then the projected government of Uganda contribution is like half. About 2.8. So out of the big, about 4.3 trillion or something, the bigger portion is, some part is borrowed, the other one is domestically contributed. And yet the domestic financing may also not be possible, so we may again supplement. So we need to have due diligence in terms of allocation and then consideration of the citizens' priorities.
Gentlemen, we need to take a break at this point. But as we take the break, you know that the law states that the executive cannot borrow without the approval of Parliament. So when we return, we will ask the MPs, you know, what portion of the blame they take for us procuring these loans that they have stated sometimes are actually not sustainable. Let's go for a break. After the break, we continue the big debate.
basimbudde.
Abasomesa abasajja mulina omuze ogutukwanira abaana.
Ffe
bazadde baabwe tubeerayo. Tukwana abazadde.
Bannange n'omukazi bw'okyaba omusajja omutono omumpi n'omugattako omunene omuwanvu.
Ayinza okwetta. Bweva mu kasana osaanuuka emyaka gyo kati gisaanuuka bw'obeera ennyo mu kasana.
This is not your usual.
Kubeera lwa mukaaga ssaawa zibeera
keep anything under the carpet. The media will pick it, social media will pick it. So if you do a poor job as parliament, you will be exposed.
All right. Yeah. Mr. Musinguzi, I'd like you to weigh in on this issue of Parliament's role and the way you see Parliament can play its role better, or that role be strengthened for the benefit of the people, because we say it often, these are the representatives of the people.
He has used the word stampeding. I want to add on that word and say blackmail. In a sense that, for example, if they bring a project documents at a time when maybe already the signatures have been appended, and you say, if we don't do this, we stand to lose. This other party will sue government and we shall lose a lot. Of course, now you are pressed between a hard place and a rock, and you end up doing what? Approving it. We have seen this happen several times, but it needs to stop. At one time, you might need to say, you know what? Do it or not. This time, we are not accepting, because it has become a trend. He also observed that probably could these people who are churning out projects be having something sinister that we are not aware of. It brings to mind the other book that they have already talked about, Confessions of the Economic Hitman, where some guy was working with the World Bank and he saw most of these projects. Somebody sits down and makes projections, puts those other formulas and says, if we approve this project, Uganda will be in a whichever middle status income status by this period. So when actually it's just a matter of playing around with formulas, so that the people now who have been
just
given
like us and the population right now.
Yes.
If we put it at this figure, we are a middle income country. If we put it at another figure, not yet.
So that book clearly indicated that some people in these lending countries, World Bank and others, sometimes they push you into approving some projects because they have something to gain out of it, and they may also tip. Yeah. When these people go to approve projects, probably the other day we were hearing about some of these people who retire either as ambassadors or what, become now lobbyists. If they come now and lobby and end up telling you that you'll get this. So we need to interrogate these further. Okay. I want quickly to talk about these things in the midst of the current crisis that I haven't had.
Just before you go there, and I'm going to allow you to do that.
Yes.
Could you just touch on our ability to negotiate these loans and negotiate them well for the benefit of the country? Because that has also been an issue where we negotiate these loans, we get these loans, but it seems like we give everything away. In fact, we negotiate to a loss for the country.
We negotiate a lot. We have seen some of the contracts with clauses that are really negative on our part. So doing due diligence, we don't see a lot of that being done. And we feel government could do some bit of that. We as civil society at one time organized and published some book after making a number of consultations, and we developed something like a checklist of the loan approval process, some of the things they could really follow on. But to what extent they're applying those, it's a question of another day. The government itself normally organizes this thing. It's called what? A Charter of Fiscal Responsibility. Right. To what extent is government adhering it? Is it just a piece of paper, or it's not? So we do not adhere to that. Adherence, when we look at last financial year, it was supposed to be a total of 45.4 trillion. But government added supplementary of 6.2 trillion. So that ultimately it became 51.6 trillion. So even this financial year, much as we have said it is going to be 48, the borrowing will even expand it when the revenue is not forthcoming and we do not do what? So Parliament needs to put a stamp or a foot on their ground and say no. What I wanted to challenge the honorable members is on the issue of having a national outlook. You come from Mbale, you come from Shema, but when you come to Parliament, you should prove to us that you're a Ugandan national, have national character, despite the fact you come from somewhere, have that national character. I repeat the question that one of your colleagues mentioned. When he cried out, she cried out and said, "Are you a Ugandan?" I wish every MP could always ask themselves that question. Are you a Ugandan? Am I a Ugandan? When I see this thing happening, suppose it was happening in my father's estates, would I really approve it that way? So we see a lot of sometimes failure to ask them, for people to be more of like patriotic. If you could play your patriotic duty in approving those, then the issue of, we wanted the parliament also to bring to task the president on the issue of the pledge to merge some of the MDAs. Because a lot of money
was it being called rationalization or something
he
like
was
that?
talking of rationalization, some of the, because there is a lot of duplication. The ministry, say, of the Ministry of Agriculture having other agencies like many secretariats, you find transport having whether URA or some of them can be retained because they are efficient, but there are many others which you would rather even have a mere desk within a ministry, but some of them are turning into authorities. And as such, of course, if you are a head of an authority, you command a lot of money. So there is a lot of leakage. There is a lot of money that goes out which wouldn't have gone out. And as a result, if MPs, for example, could question some of this and say, Mr. President, you promised us we are going to have this. Can you give us an update on this picture, or was it just for public show?
All right. There's actually, the minister has been, well, they've been tasking him, but let's hear from the Honorable Katisho.
You know, what I have seen before I joined Parliament, I used to, people used to talk about Parliament. And it's good, but it is also bad. The expectation from Parliament is very high.
Yes.
which shows that Ugandans have a lot of faith. But Parliament is the third, is an arm of government out of the three. We do not control the other arms of government. The three arms of government have got a mandate that complement each other. So sometimes I think the thinking I used to have also was to, you know, the same thinking, blame government, blame Parliament, you are not doing enough. Actually, it is, Parliament is the punching bag of the three arms of government. Unfairly sometimes. Because you see, you look at the issue of rationalization, for example. We tasked government, an ad hoc committee was established. It sat, went through the issues, made recommendations, submitted the report to government on the floor of Parliament. And the Minister of Public Service said, give me 2 months, I will come back. Today we were asking, the 2 months have ended. Can we have a response? So, what do? You know, you are pushing, doing your best to push, but there's a responsibility on the other side.
Right.
So sometimes I feel that the public unfairly thinks about Parliament, and rightly so.
Parliament, you are the people's representatives, and
Yes.
you remind the people of this. The other is, you know, you have a responsibility to hold the executive to account.
So if you have a
And
report,
then, for example, we watched Parliament today. There is a minister that Parliament was very unhappy with.
yes,
And the Parliament spoke very sternly
Yes.
about this minister, and even went as far as planning to refer the minister to the Rules and Discipline Committee of Parliament, which means the mechanisms to deal with these individuals, though from the executive, actually exist. And yet, how often does Parliament use these? Other than lamenting over and over again, honorable ministers, you are not coming to the House.
no, we don't lament. I can tell you, for example, that minister, the report was presented, recommendation was made, and the report, the Parliament resolved, advising government for the minister to step aside. That is what the government, that's what Parliament can do. And we are waiting for the government to update us on the actions taken.
Right.
But before we could even get the update, the minister is ranting on social media, denigrating parliament, and that's why you have now the debate that came on the floor today to refer the minister to the rules committee. So for me, I have a lot of faith in the current parliament, but we are not going to solve all the problems because it takes, we are complementing part of government. If the executive cannot do certain things at the pace at which we want, you know, the public must also, you know, demand for answers. But to be bashing government all the time, I can tell you, when you,
all the time, yes.
I mean parliament, when you go to the constituency as a member of parliament, you are almost like a government. Every problem, everything that has failed, you are to blame. People will expect you to fix the roads, to fix the health centers, to fix the school system. But you are an individual. But you have government institutions. The Auditor General has come up with reports. Why doesn't government take action on them? If Parliament has come up with reports, submitted, why hasn't
that famous line that parliamentary resolutions are only advisory to the executive.
So for me, I think that we share the burden and the blame, but the public, in fact, I want to caution the public that the worst thing you can have is to undermine your own parliament with the parliamentarians that are trying to do so much amidst the different
All right. Gentlemen, our time is moving really quickly, and I'd like us to, you know, for this issue of Uganda's growing debt, a way forward from each one of us, and if time allows, we will just give our comments on something that has also caused quite a bit of controversy. Uganda's touching or not touching lower middle income. The Honorable Mazawa, let's begin with you on how do we then move forward, because yeah, these figures are real, and the debt, yes, has to be paid. Actually, you know, Mr. Musinguzu spoke about the fact that last year, you know, there were moves to apply for, you know, debt relief being forgiven, and we've benefited before. I think it's called under the HIPIC, and we very quickly, you know, wrapped up the debt. But yes, how do we move forward?
I think this would be a good idea, asking for these debt reliefs. But once someone gives you a debt relief today, doesn't mean you come back again and ask for relief. You know, it shows how vulnerable you are as a country. How this shows that actually you're not in a position to pay. You're just at someone's mercy to forgive you. So I believe this is a good way forward. It would help reduce the burden, but it would portray a bad image to most of these international lenders of ours. So I believe this is not a path we should be looking at, because we can't control it. But we should look at the various ways through which we can control and influence these policies right here on the ground. One of the things I'm actually looking at is perhaps in the next budgeting process, we see how we can try to prevent wasteful expenditure, how government can protect some of these funds, and we try to keep our budget consistent, because I'm certain our income will grow. So if our income is growing and our expenditure is slightly constant, then I believe it could help. We would get extra resources that would help pay off some of these debts, which would kind of relieve our country. The other issue I've noticed is about prioritizing and what are the priorities of government. When we're in the budgeting process, there is what they call the funding.
These priorities in the NDPs.
Yes.
And therefore, you know, why do we have to keep guessing what the priorities are? We have development plans, and they are clear on what our priorities are or should be.
Yes. When you look at Parliament, this budgeting process we're in, we were supposed to critically compare our budget and align it with the national budget we're supposed to align the national with the National Development Plan 3, which we are on now, and the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility. These were some of the key issues that were noted in the report of the Budget Committee, that there was no alignment. Because we had to give, say, tourism development this amount of money, but the ministry is directing we give this amount of money, which we believe is not proper. We are supposed to align these three if we want to move in a streamlined way. So this is one of the key challenges we are facing. And what these people usually do, Cabinet does, is they bring the wasteful expenditure under funded priorities, and they leave the critical things that we really need as a country under the unfunded priorities, such that when they are brought in a supplementary budget, there is no way you can refuse to fund these projects because they're a priority of the country. So I believe we need to take keen interest in this during the budgeting process. We need to pay a lot of attention to what government is terming as the funded priorities vis-a-vis the unfunded priorities.
Okay. Mr. Musinguzi, and a lot of hope has been put in oil, that oil flowing, and we've staked a lot of this borrowing on the oil coming through to pay it off.
Before Ukraine came on,
yes, we
were oil, I mean the West was so much inclined towards reduction of carbon by like UK was talking of by 2030 they should have gone to carbon zero something. I do not know whether the international community now has stuck to that those commitments, or was it France or whatever?
They have gone back.
They may go back. But prior to that, the drive was towards carbon-free whatever, because the environment is becoming an issue, while in some of our LDC, environment is not a big issue. There are countries like, if you are not committed to environment, like Australia, you lose it. So environment is becoming more topical than other things in determining. But now in Uganda, we are investing in, of course, we have had those the final investment decision and others, but we are tagging too much on oil as the source of our relief on the debt problem. But challenges may come. We are going, he was talking of technology, and even in Uganda we are thinking of having even these vehicles that are, what do they call it, electronic or whatever?
Electric vehicles.
Electric vehicles. Yes. So in the event that, for example, oil does not command so much money in the international market, how shall we fare by now borrowing with this kind of trust? Our hopes may be dashed in case it doesn't come to fruition. Debt relief, you talked about it. There are usually conditions towards debt relief. One of them is for you to become now more transparent and accountable and whatever, but at the same time to allocate now the money that has been forgiven of you, that money, the equivalent, should be allocated to social sectors. And government, in spite of having got debt relief, sometimes we have not seen it now reorienting the funds towards those critical sectors, but instead it continues again into these other sectors that again drive it further deep into the debt indebtedness. Wasteful expenditure, we must go on that and have really the issue of due diligence and also adherence to either the legislation. We are talking of Public Finance Management Act, which we always flout, the procurement procedures, we flout them. So we need to stick again to the rules. We have created the rules ourselves, but again, all the moves regarding budget management, finance management, public finance management, little do we ever look like we are adhering to those.
All right. Yeah. Honorable Kachishova.
The way forward, first of all, I think we must be more efficient in terms of the utilization of the debt we are taking on, in terms of the absorption timelines. Make sure that we don't have idle investments or idle money that is costing us.
Right.
If you look at the amount of money we are paying for deemed energy, because we have not been able to evacuate power, because the transmission line, Agago, I think Gulu transmission line is not ready. And so we have to pay because we signed a contract. And that's huge amount of money, simply because we are not efficient. So government needs to be more efficient in terms of borrowing, synchronizing the loans, and the planning to make sure that there is a seamless linkage between the plan, the borrowing, the execution, and the budgeting of government. Secondly, we have to make sure that we examine the component that is going into productive sector. Because if our loan cash book is growing and the GDP is not growing as expected, then the debt to GDP ratio will continue rising.
Right.
And when it continues to rise, then we start getting worried about the sustainability. As it is now, if you compare with many other countries, even on the African continent, we are not yet bad off. For me, the number does not worry me. What worries me is what the loan does, the inefficiency in terms of the borrowing, implementation, execution, and those ones are easy to fix. Once they are fixed, and then of course, the purpose. Once those ones are fixed, the economy will expand, we shall do projects quickly, we shall realize the benefits, and we shall realize the growth of the economy. And then the figure will naturally reduce. Of course, the other issue is about the appetite, consumptive appetite of government. There are things we should stop promising. If we wake up and promise salary increases when we know we cannot sustain them, let's be honest. Let's not promise things that we cannot do. The issue of too many projects, for me, I think government needs to have a complete audit of all the ongoing projects. And we first clean up the projects that are under implementation, finish them before we start committing. Because there is a lot of money sunk. There are so many projects where we have committed without counterpart funding, and they are costing us as government.
All right.
So if we can be more, we examine them. Some of them maybe we need to retire them and put them on hold. We move forward. We do a clean-up process and then be able to move forward with the new projects.
All right. Well, there's also the government, penalties and legal fees that, add to what government owes out there. But, would like to thank you for giving those comments. Now, very briefly, we just have about 9 minutes and we're out of here. There's been a lot of confusion on the whole issue of, attaining middle income status. This came out just before, the president, we got into the budget speech, State of the Nation and budget speech. And then the World Bank coming out and saying, no, Uganda, according to the figures they have, Uganda is not yet there. And UBOS being the government entity that is charged with, the numbers, saying, no, we are there. And World Bank was using wrong figures of the, figures from a previous financial year for the figures they have. We are there. Let me start with, my immediate neighbor here, and whether that actually makes a difference, declaring ourselves or being declared a middle-income economy. Does that make an actual difference?
Honestly speaking, if I was, say, the International Monetary Fund or any other lender out there, and to believe these figures, I think I would believe the World Bank. Because the World Bank, it's an international organization, and it has state standards. It has a standard procedure through which it passes. So I think it's not proper for us as a country to deny what the World Bank is giving us and to push ourselves to the next level. It's the first time actually I've heard that a country wants to push itself to another level of income.
Promoting
status,
yourself to the next.
itself to the next class. So it's the first time I've heard of it, and I think it's a bit funny and weird, because in order for you to be in that class, you must be with the per capita of about 1,045 beyond, which is $1,046. So apart from the figures we're being given, as we are politicians, we move around, we see how the economy is performing. And when you look at the way things are moving, I think we are even worse off than...
Well, they are the poor. Yes, the poor could have become poorer, or the number of poor could have increased, but it also shows that the rich could have become a lot richer. And when that is distributed...
You know, the entire world, not only Uganda, has been facing tough times. COVID-19 has impacted the economy worldwide. And what is so magical about the Ugandan economy, that it has grown significantly during these COVID times, yet the big people out there, the big companies, the very rich people who are running bankrupt. I heard of recent in the newspapers, Simba Manyo and all that, they were facing challenges during this COVID. I've heard of that Naguru Hotel and all that. Those are the big players would be looking at, Rocco and all that, performing well. But when you do a deep analysis in the banking sector, all these people we believe who are big are suffering. And why are people are starving in Karamoja? This is an indicator that things are not good. Why is government sending tons and tons of posho to Karamoja? So I'm just giving you a highlight of what is critically happening. Yes, we usually use these figures to make the informed decisions in statistics. It's always not proper to base on what you're seeing, but what we're seeing gives us a picture of whether we can rely on the figures or not.
Right.
And it can give us a view through which we can see this. And
all right.
The president, I saw the figures that they gave him, the ones they based on. They did not put into account the rate of growth of our population.
Right.
That is something which is critical when you're determining the level of growth of a country. Our population has grown significantly. We are supposed to be having a census probably this year, next year at the start of 2023, which I don't know.
UBOS is the one that will do that
Yes,
census. I'm wondering whether they can go ahead and shoot
without
themselves
proper
in the
figures,
foot.
the
Yes.
World Bank, I'm certain, has better methods and better techniques
All right.
of measuring the status of a country.
All right, let's hear from Mr. Musinguzi. And I hope that the people who have lent us money will not now come and say, now, since you're a middle income economy, you pay our money. And you pay it according to schedule.
I will start from there and say, what drives you, one, to claim and promote yourself into that, to ideally maybe the other entity like World Trade Organization or World Bank or others would have rated you so. There was this case of China, for example. China stayed so much in this other status for some time until, I think, was it President Trump who said, you are unfairly dealing with us. Actually, you belong to this higher level. And they were kind of denying. So some of the countries actually would rather stay in a lower level, at least in public eyes, because there are a number of benefits that accrue to a country that is still there. For example, there will be, what are the benefits, say, of not exceeding the next level? You'll be categorized in a certain level of, for example, if they are giving you concessional loans, there is an interest rate that is for those in the lower category compared to those that join it. There are some conditions that really you end up, there are some things you still benefit. There could be like aid, there could be things like that. So you miss them when you move to the next.
We're here asking that they forgive us our loans. How do you forgive a country?
A rich country. So one of the things that could have driven some of like our country to claim so is, one of them is political satisfaction of the government, that to give the impression that you are making positive, positive whatever changes as mandated. And then two, you are also probably more credit-worthy globally because you are managing your economics, your fiscal policies well. Then also you may attract, as a result, maybe foreign direct investment because they will say it's a good investment climate, these people are doing well. You may be eligible to those World Banks and others, and maybe things like tourism, and then you can also associate with people of the other class. Those
Right with
things.
the big boys, all right.
I disagree on
Yes.
these things. One, I come from civil society, and one of them is civil society was funded heavily by one development partner called Democratic
DGF.
Governance Facility.
Yes.
And it was paying at least 100 million pounds. And this DGF was stopped around 2019. It was funding 60 NGOs. Each of those NGOs has an average of, say, 15 personnel. And the average salary of each of those was around 3 million, let's say. Some are 20, others are 3 or whatever. Each of those was supposed to be paying payee, NSSF. And so with this stoppage for two years plus, all that money, government couldn't have been making it. And that's a big chunk. Teachers were, at times, private schools were not getting a salary. And these schools were supposed to have been getting food, supplies, and others. So the whole chain was closed. And you can't claim that with those issues, you could have now jumped for the whole of these things. So I don't agree with
the global trends as well that
Yes.
Honorable Masaba spoke about earlier on. Honorable Katesh, let's end with you because we are out of time.
Okay, first of all, I think for me, I don't want to dwell on the figure because I want us to be realistic. What is the biggest contributor of the GDP growth that we are, because you are looking at the GDP versus the number of people in Uganda. So you'll get a rich man like Sudir and others, you add their income with people in Shema, in Karamoja, and then you come up with the average. Now, the biggest contributors is services, 41.5%. And the services we know, telecom, banking.
Yes.
Okay. And the telecom and banking is dominated by foreigners.
Yes.
Okay. So we are workers, we are not owners.
And in some strange way, we've allowed them to repatriate a lot of what they make here.
So if you look at the indicators from the contributors, and then you look at where the majority of the population is, agriculture which contributes around 24%, 4.1%, but catering for over 60% of the population, then it gives you the picture. I would like us to, I am not quick to celebrate whether we have reached the door or entrance of middle income, because it is meaningless. I must see what is the per capita income of my people in Shema. I have gone to the villages, to parishes, and I have seen people who do not have $200, dollars per annum. And so if I come here and I'm celebrating 1,000 here in Kampala, but down on the ground, the poverty is so much. For me, I will not celebrate.
All right.
But I would rather focus on how do we get our people more productive, get them out of the subsistence into the money economy, like the president has always said, so that they are contributing to the growth of GDP. Because if we become so comfortable and say we have reached, now we are saying World Bank used wrong figures, as internationally will not be believed. But even locally, as politicians, we represent the people. I cannot stand here and say the people in Shema have reached middle income. No. We must go and work to make sure those people reach the entrance of middle income. I cannot celebrate the entrance based on services and foreign-owned banks that are contributing largely, but what is the quality of life?
All right.
Of the person?
Gentlemen, we have to end here only because of time, but we'd like to thank you for giving us a quality debate this evening. And you, viewer, thank you very much for being part of the big debate tonight. So our dear guests, the Honorable Kateshungwa, Mr. Musinguzi, and the Honorable Masaba, would like to thank you for being part of the show. We'll return next week with another edition of the show. Till then, good night. God bless you. Don't blink.